So you want to build the ultimate whoop? Well, thankfully, I got your back because that's what I'm going to be doing today. This whoop is really light, really fast, and also pretty efficient for what it is. Right now, I can barely control it in my basement, it's that fast. But even sending it, I'm getting a very solid 2 to 3 minutes of battery life. That's for sure enough for a full 2-minute run. This isn't even that light, as it weighs like around 17.7 grams. However, the power from the Super B flight controller, which are usually for HD builds, kind of makes up for it. Anyway, if you want to build this for yourself, I'll have all the parts I use in the build in the video description, as well as some alternative parts. Anyway, let's get to building. I like to start off with installing the motors in the frame first. You can solder up the motors on the FC outside of the frame, but that's how I normally do it. If it's hard to solder the motors while it's on a frame, like for example, if you're doing the toilet tank battery position, then definitely mount the motors on the FC first before the frame. But since it's not the case, I'm going to be installing on the frame. What I like to do is put the first screw on not too tight. Do not tighten it too much because you gotta have it move around just a little bit so you can easily put on the second and third screw. Okay, first screw on, now to do the same with the other three. Okay, the motors are installed on the frame. Now, if you have Rennie screws, which stands for reinforced nylon, then you can save like almost half a gram instead of using these metal screws. But I don't have it, so we are moving on. So the base weight is going to be based off the metal screws, of course. Alright, up next we're going to install the pigtail on the flight controller. What I recommend doing is to have it just a little short so you can save some weight, but don't make it too short to the point you're going to stress out the wires because they can break. Okay, so the recommended length is 50 to 55 millimeters from the end of the plug to the end of the wire. But if you want just a little more slack, then go ahead and do 55. Okay, now we got the pigtail cut just a little bit. I recommend cutting the ground wire just a touch short, maybe 1 or 2 millimeters short, because the ground wire is always going to be the furthest back. So this is just going to make things a little cleaner. Alright, now to strip these wires, you can do it with your fingernail, which I normally do, or you can use the wire strippers or a cutting tool of any kind, as long as you be very careful. Alright, now we got the wire strip. Now to tin both the wires and the power and ground pads. Almost said wires. Alright, now that everything is pre-tinned, time to solder it up. Okay, I had to cut the camera off just briefly because it is a pain in the butt to actually solder these pigtails on there, especially with this soldering iron. So I had to use my other soldering iron, which is like across the whole room where the camera is nowhere near pointing, but it's definitely worth having more heat into these pads, that's for sure. Sorry there isn't any time lapse for this one. Alright, now it's time to install the VTX. Ignore that the flight controller is already on the frame. That is an oopsie on my part. But I highly recommend installing this while it's not on the frame just yet. On a Unify, there are 6 solder pads, but all you need is 4. That is the main, power and ground, and video and smart audio. Try and find the smallest wires you can. But the easiest way to get small wires is if you have brushed motors, you can just clip the wires off of those. And there you go. That's your super thin light wires. Only do this if it's brush motors you're not using anymore. So yeah, time to get these wires on the VTX real quick. Alright, I got the motor wires hooked up. So this is specifically for the Unify Nano Pro 32, but I think it's the same for the regular Nano Pro? I'm not sure. Now if you look at the pad layouts for the flight controller, I'm using the ELRS version. The top of the flight controller, the pad is the TX2, RX2, 5 volts, and ground. You could either power this using the 5 volt or the battery. Now, in order to mount this on the flight controller, you can either do it on the top or on the bottom. I'm going to do it on the bottom because it'll be a lot cleaner. Now, this is going to be a little awkward because the frame's in the way. That's why I recommend doing it when it's not in the frame. I know the video is going to be out of order and everything, but oh well. Now, I could just take the flight controller off, but the motor's already soldered. Now, I like to mount this using some double-sided tape, but you can use any other methods as long as it works and it stays sturdy. And as long as it doesn't short out the flight controller or anything. And then next, you just try to mount it on the flight controller. Like I said, you can just put it on the front like this, or the top like this, or you can put it on the very bottom, which I will be doing, because like I said, it'll be cleaner. I'll be right back while I try and awkwardly put this in the frame. Okay, now I got that mounted on the flight controller itself. And next, pre-tin the necessary pads, and then trim the wires to a necessary length. Make sure it keeps some slack. I'll mention that for the motors later. And then solder it on. Smart audio goes to the TX2, by the way. I'll mention how to set those up in Betaflight later. Alright, now we got the VTX all wired up nice and clean. Anyway, next we're going to be installing the flight controller into the frame. Now, unfortunately, this flight controller comes with screws and grommets specifically for HD, which are really darn long, so it's not really ideal for analog. So that's why I'm going to be using these grommets and screws instead, which you can buy on tinywhoop.com, link in the description. So anyway, let's put the flight controller in the frame. Like I said, the easiest way I know to put the flight controller into the frame is by putting on the grommets into the frame first. Some people like to put it on the flight controller, but this is how I like to do it, and it's definitely easier. This is my go-to method. Make sure you have the frame put the opposite way from the frame. Make sure the arrow right here is pointing back, and then try and get this in the frame. You can try and flex it to make it a little easier to get it in. And just like that, now the flight controller is installed. Next up is to solder the motors into the frame. I recommend doing it now than later. But first things first, because this flight controller requires you to solder on the motors. Let's try and cut off these motor plugs. And in case you wonder why this is already cut off, I made a mistake in another build, so I had to cut that off. So yeah, let's cut these 3 off first. Anyway, now you got these cut off, let me just tell you, you can try and cut it shorter, but make sure you leave some slack on the motor wires, so it won't be too short to reach it, and it won't be too short to stress the motors out, assuming if it did reach it. So leave some slack if you can, by maybe some a few millimeters. And next, to make sure it is actually able to reach until you actually feel happy about that length. And then now you can get on the solder. Just like the pigtail, make sure you try and strip every single wire first. Motor wires are stripped. Now you can try and pre-tin all the wires and the pads. Alright, now we got the wires and the motor pads tinned up. Now you know what time it is. Time to solder them up. Before we start, make sure you pull up the wires out of the way when you're not using it, so it'll make wiring a little easier, and so the wires don't get in the way while you're soldering. Alright, let's start soldering up the camera and mount the camera to a canopy. What you do first is to cut off the connector, since we don't really need it. It'll definitely be useful for a diamond or another Happy Mall flight controller that uses a plug, but this one doesn't use it since it's got an external VTX. Now, since we're going to be using my canopy, which I'll talk about how to actually mount that a little later, I recommend cutting right here so you can leave a little bit of slack. And that's going to be really important so you don't have to resolder the whole camera. Just like the other soldering process, just strip the wires, tin up the wires and the necessary pads, and then start soldering. Alright, now we got the camera all soldered up. We don't need the soldering iron anymore. Now we try and get the canopy on. The easiest way to get this canopy on is to put the lens in an angle and then try and slide it in. I highly recommend putting some E6000 around the lens so it will not rotate at all. So yeah, I highly recommend E6000 on it. Now with that done, again I highly recommend getting some screws that are small and light. Link in the description where I got these. And then you try and screw the canopy on. Alright, front is in, now on with the sides. Try and fold it like this so it'll reach the grommet just like that, and then try and screw that in. Okay, now you got the side in there. Now it's time to go put the back on. You have 4 options you can choose from that will determine your angle. The farthest outward is the lowest angle, farthest inward is going to be the highest angle. I like to choose the 3rd option towards the inside. And there we go. That is the camera and canopy installed. You can see the wires, they have some slack to move around, so it's not going to stress out the wires or the components themselves. And that is the goal here. You can try and replace the camera wires with these thinner wires that I got from brush motors. Oh, you can't even see that because it blends in. Whatever. There you go. There's the blue one. You can see a little better. But yeah, if you can find some old brushed motors you've been using, you can cut these down and use those on the VTX and maybe the camera as well. Lastly, let's install the props. Like I said, I'm using the Gemfan 31mm tri-blades. This has been my go-to motors for years, and I still use them today. So yeah, let's get them all out real quick. What I like about these Gemfans is it comes with 2 sets, and they can be in any color. And now TinyWhoop is selling some dyed version of these props. So that is really awesome. Be sure to check that out. Now make sure you put the props in the motors correctly depending on the direction you want to do it. In my case, I like to get it on the outside, which will be like this and this. So one will be counterclockwise, clockwise, and counterclockwise. How to actually tell which prop direction goes to where if you're new to this hobby? With this Gemfan prop, if you see the little curve on the blade, imagine it going like the direction of that curve. In this case, this is the clockwise orientation. And it's vice versa with the counterclockwise props. If you're using another prop, like the HQ for example, the blades are a little symmetrical, so you can't really use that trick. Instead of the curved part of the blades, use the top part, the highest part of the blades. Then that's pretty much a similar way to determine it. Now after we figured out the prop direction and the motor direction where it's going to go, like mine's going to be outside like I said, let's push these into the motors. And there we go, the Whoop is finished. Look how good it looks. I chose the forest green frame and the yellow prop combo that was given to me, and this combo looks really good, especially with the gray canopy, which I've always had. Anyway, onto the Betaflight setup. Before we go on to Betaflight, I like to flash the ESCs first. To do that, I would go to esc-configurator.com. That's where you can flash the BlueJ firmware onto your ESCs. So yeah, just hit connect, plug in your battery, making sure it's full charged, and then click on read settings. I already flashed it on here, so I'm just going to show you anyway how to actually do it. You just click on flash all ESCs. This is what I did. I would choose BlueJ, do not touch the ESC at all, just leave that the same. Go to version V0.16, that's what I have on here. In PWM, I'll choose 96 and then you click on flash. I'm not gonna flash this again because I already did it, so just hit cancel. But be sure to flash it if you haven't already. And on the left, these are the settings I tend to use. These were recommended to me, and so far these were doing really well. So you can copy these if you want to. Now we got the ESC flashed. We can just go out of here for now. Unplug the battery because we don't need a battery right now. And then let's go on to Betaflight. What I would do from here is to flash the firmware. I do recommend that, but you can do it with the stock firmware, but it'll just be nicer if you can like flash the firmware. So choose the board. I will choose Crazy B F4 SX 1280. That's what I will choose because that's the ELRS version. And choose the latest version, which is at the time of the video 4.3.1. Once you get in, I would like copy the diff file from the description of the video. And then once you copy it, go to CLI and then paste it from here. And then type in save once you are done. Alright, once you got the CLI pasted and saved, I would go back into the flight controller and then go to ports. Make sure this is all the same. Make sure you are 2 peripherals as TBS Smart Audio. Then save that. Time to bind up the whoop. So, like I said, I'm using the ELRS version of this. So, if you're using the FR Sky version, I highly recommend using Red Pine. So to do that, you change the SPI bus receiver and then type in Red Pine and then select that. And then save and reboot. But like I said, I am using ELRS, so I'm not going to save it. I'm just going to hit refresh instead. But once you do set up Red Pine like that, then next thing to do is set up your radio to Red Pine if you have not already. And then once you do that, make sure you bind the radio. I'm not going to go into details because all radios are different and I don't feel like recording my radio just to show everyone how to actually do it. So yeah, sorry about that. And then next you can calibrate the accelerometer. So it'll stay pretty even, especially if you're going to be using either angle mode or crash recovery. So that's going to be pretty important. Next, go to PID tuning. This will all be changed in the CLI. It'll be completely different. I'm just experimenting at the time of the recording. But anyway, if you want to, chances are my tune is not going to be perfect, so if you want to tune it, be sure to mess with the sliders. Enable expert mode and be sure to change the sliders. Probably the master multiplier up and down just a little bit. I don't know. I'm not a good person to ask about PID tuning, so let's move on. Rate profiles. This is what I normally use, except it's like 10 over on a max rate. This is the rates I usually use, and it's on actual rates. If you prefer Betaflight, change the rate type to Betaflight, and then change from there. However, this is only acro rates, since I'm only on acro now. If you want to use only angle mode rates, I would recommend only going to Betaflight and change all of roll and pitch to 0. Because those don't matter. The only thing you should change is the yaw RC rate. You can zero out the super rates, but only mess with the yaw rate. And if you want to change the roll and pitch, you go back to PID settings, scroll down, and then only mess with angle strength and angle limit. I haven't done angle mode in a while, but I think I had strength to 60 and angle limit to 80 last time I used it. So be sure to change those settings as well. And also, while we are at the pit tuning, make sure to have VBAT sag compensation on. I don't know why that's off, but make sure that is on. If you want to switch between angle mode and acro, there is a way to actually change the rates based on the switches. So you enable expert mode, as I said, and then go to adjustments. Once you go to adjustments, then I recommend setting these up. Then once you actually set that up, you can have a switch to actually change the rate profile, which is very convenient if you run both angle and acro. Just make sure you change when channeled to that switch, and then via channel that switch, and have all three of them if you tend to use multiple rate profiles, aka the that angle mode. And also, if you do use angle mode, make sure you go to modes and then have angle mode activate via a switch to that same switch that was set in adjustments. I no longer use angle mode, so I'll just disable this. And speaking of modes, make sure you set that up. Make sure you have arm switch to your actual arm switch, and then make sure you have flip over after crash enabled as well through the switch, because that is going to be really important if you actually flip over. That way you can just flip the switch, use turtle mode, and then flip it back over. Next, go to video transmitter and then set up your channels. The diff all already set up the channels, but it's only based on the Pro 32 Unified. So make sure you check which VTX have which tables, so it won't mess it up a little bit. But once you verify the VTX table, you go to selection mode and change the band and change the channels to anything you want, and then you can also change it through the goggles as well remotely, which is very convenient, especially in race events. Lastly, I will go to motors and verify that it is spinning the right way. You do so by clicking on this. We're not flying a 5-inch, so we don't have to take the props off. We're flying a 1S whoop, so it's pretty safe. Do not do this with your 5-inch. I swear, you're going to be cutting your fingers off. So only do this with a whoop. Okay, plug in your battery and then test the motors out. And at the same time, make sure you check if the direction is right. The easiest way to tell is to have your hand under the whoop, because naturally you're going to be holding on to the whoop through the cable just so it doesn't go anywhere. And once you activate the motors, make sure you actually feel it, like you feel the wind coming from it. Like this is spinning the right way because I can feel it, and it's also spinning from the one position. That's spinning the right way. That's spinning the right way as well, and that's spinning the right way. I mean, to be fair, I did also set this up ahead of time, but if there's a motor that is spinning the wrong way, you can just go back to the ESC software and then change the direction on one of the motor positions. Like for example, motor number 3 is spinning the wrong way. You can go to the ESC software and then change the direction from there, and that's pretty much simple. But make sure you exit out of Betaflight first. Alright, the last one is going to be really important because this flight controller is made to be for HD. There is a setting you must do to make it work for analog, and I'll copy and paste it from the store page. And this is what you gotta type in: set OSD underscore display port device equals max 7456. And that's the main thing you gotta do to make it work for and a log. And there you go. Now we got everything built, everything all set up in Betaflight and everything. Now it is ready to fly. If you enjoyed this video, give this a big old thumbs up and comment what you think about it. This video did take me a little while to make, so any feedback is highly appreciated. Anyway, time to fly this thing. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.